Hey everybody, just want to send a quick thank you to Pete Harney and Ryan from the Gamers Week podcast. Both of these exceptional people support me on Patreon, and you can too by going to patreon.com/a gamer looks at 40. For as little as $2, you get early access to shows, access to polls, and a bunch of other things I can't really think of right now. Go there, and if you think it's worth it, by all means, please sign up. Once again, that's patreon.com/a gamer looks at 40. Imagine if you had a full set of your favorite video game system. Every game with every accessory with every version. Now imagine if you had a full set of everything. I mean, every console ever made. And finally, imagine what you could do with it. What would you do? Would you sell it online for crazy prices, making potentially hundreds upon thousands of dollars? Or would you just share it with the world? My guests on this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40 did the latter. With over 100 years of combined video game collecting experience and an archive unlike any other, Joe Santulli, John Hardie, and Sean Kelly built the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. Within the 10,000 square foot space lies a treasure trove of artifacts, exhibits, and playable experiences, all designed to educate, entertain, and inspire fans of this one-of-a-kind medium. If you listen to this show, and clearly you are, this is like dying and going to electronic heaven. On today's episode, Joe, John, and Sean share stories of collecting decades ago, the current state of the market, and why the National Video Game Museum is unique and special. Let's join the conversation. Hello and welcome to episode 36 of A Gamer Looks at 40. I'm Bill Tucker, and I have three distinguished guests on the show today. They are the directors of the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. I have with me Joe Santulli. What's going on, Joe?
Hello.
Hey, John Hardie.
How are you?
And last but not least, Mr. Sean Kelly.
How you doing?
Hey, what's going on? I can't even read my own writing. See how that works? I can't even read it out. So, guys, once again, thanks so much for taking the time out today. Y'all been collecting and playing games for quite some time, and you have quite the histories. As I mentioned before, I did a story for Texas Highways Magazine on the National Video Game Museum when y'all first opened. Just fell in love with the space. It's an incredible place for retro gamers like myself and my audience to check out. And I'd like to talk a bit about that later, but first, I'd love to get an idea of what was your start in games? Like, where'd y'all begin your individual journeys, and how'd y'all meet up? John, I'll start with you since I'm looking at you.
All right. Well, yeah. So my history really was, like my partners, we were collecting stuff since the early 80s. We were getting into video games as a collectible, right? And not so much for value or money, but just because we wanted to, do we have them all? How many games are out there? Trying to figure all that information out. And, a lot of the work we did back then was wanting to know the backstory of who wrote a game or why a game didn't come out or whatever. So, for me personally, I was an Atari kid. I'm an Atari guy now. I'm still an Atari kid, I guess. And, but I progressed through the 26 and the 5200, and the 8-bit Atari computers is my big thing. My partners often say that you could write the word Atari on a piece of toilet paper and sell it to me. I'd probably buy it, which is true. So I'm really hardcore into that. And but all the classic systems were really my thing, and that's really how I got started with all this.
Awesome. So what about the Atari really connected with you? Because it sounds like you do have a strong connection with it.
I do. I guess it was because it was my first real system that I owned as a kid. Mm-hmm. But there was a certain magic. And, for me, it was Atari. But for other people, that magic was in television or Coleco or whatever system, but those times in general had a special magic about them. Every game was new. It was something different. We were creating new genres of video games. And really, there was a certain mystique about it, and just amazingness. I often relate it to my parents, growing up and experiencing the birth of TV, right? That was an amazing thing, whereas I take it for granted. I never questioned, always, TV, so what,
Right.
But for us to experience the computer and video game revolutions, I think a lot of the kids today don't really appreciate that, like that history.
And that's definitely one of the things that the National Video Game Museum is looking to capture and give on to, or share with other generations, who may be experiencing these things for the first time. What about you, Joe?
I was an Atari guy for a while until Intellivision came out. Then I was an Intellivision guy. Then I was a Commodore guy, a Sega guy, a Sony guy, a Microsoft guy. I mean, my particular start in all this was I had a best friend named Kevin, whose family was always really good to him as far as, giving him stuff that he wanted. So we played Pong on his kitchen television for a couple of years. I wasn't allowed to have a Pong. My parents saw what happened to my cousin's television set. They had Pong on their TV. I never even got to play it there because no matter what you watched on their TV, even if it was television, Gunsmoke, Charlie's Angels, whatever we were watching back then, you could still see Pong in the background because it had burned its image into the television set. So my parents wouldn't allow me to have a Pong system. It wasn't until I was able to buy my own TV that I got to be an Atari guy.
Gotcha.
That was where I kind of got it all started. But my mania is pretty deep. I've collected everything from those Pong systems all the way up until I probably stopped collecting when we opened the museum. Figured it's all there now, so I don't need to amass anymore.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's funny. I had my uncle had an Intellivision, and we played on that before I think I had a Nintendo. And then one day I went to my uncle's house for a garage sale, right? To help him out, pull some stuff out the garage. And he had the entire Intellivision with all of his games, probably about 30 games, just sitting out there with a price tag of $10. And I'm like, and even I was still young, but I'm like, no, you have no, please, I'll give you 20. And I gave it to my best friend who still has it, who collects, dabbles in collecting. So it's interesting how, man, the little sleeves, right? Wasn't that the one that had the little overlays? You slide it to the controller and tell you how to play it. Very confusing for that little controller. That's very cool. Sean, what about you, man?
That was my thing. I started with Intellivision in 1979, and I got pretty into it. I got put together a pretty decent collection, but I kind of got out of it for a couple of years. I've told this story many times, and I got to the point where I realized that there were girls out there that I wasn't going to find in my family room. So I dropped the video games for a couple of years, but then. About 1989, when I had snagged myself a girl and was about to marry her, I realized, I got this secured now, so I'm gonna get all my video games back now. So I started gathering up video games and collecting them. And basically at that time, really all I wanted to do was get back the Intellivision games that I had. But it kind of snowballed from there. As an Intellivision guy, I was the odd man out because everybody that I was connecting with all wanted Atari stuff. They weren't really interested in Intellivision. So what it turned out to be is I started gathering up Atari stuff at flea markets and garage sales and things like that. And I realized, oh my God, there's all these Atari games too. And at one point, Wired magazine did an article on me, and they called me the man with 50,000 games in his garage, because I had amassed about 50,000 games in my garage at one point or another. And I don't even know why. It just it just got out of control. And, I guess I'm pretty obsessive with things like that. Once when I get into something, I can go pretty crazy. And the other thing about this is I've had different hobbies over the years. I collected stamps and beer cans and all those other stupid things like everybody else, but never really lost interest in the video games. In fact, that's what I do professionally now. Is I own a retro video game store in Chicago, and I manage a museum in Texas. So, and frankly, Joe does the exact same thing in New Jersey. So.
That's right. And that's right. I remember that from the conversation a few years ago. Joe, where in Jersey are you? Out of curiosity.
Northern Jersey, Clifton.
Clifton, yeah, I'm from Bloomfield originally.
Oh, yeah, the area.
Yeah, so I know the area. It's very interesting. That's cool. Maybe for our listeners do you have a shop down there or?
Yeah, Digital
cool.
Press. It's called Digital Press Video Games. It's on Route 46 in Clifton.
Excellent. All right, there you go. So if you're in Jersey, my brother, I'll tell him to head on over because he's still in Bloomfield. Snag me some good stuff. But it's funny because y'all talk about collecting and acquiring these pieces, especially Sean, sounds like you've been acquiring for a while. How was it back in the early days of this? Because obviously right now you have internet and you have online retailers and all that sort of thing, which is making it a little more difficult to get things at a good price. We can kind of talk about that. How was it back in the old days?
It was a lot better in the old days. I'll tell you what.
Sure.
I used to, at the time when I first started collecting, my parents lived in California, so I would, and I was still here in Chicago, so I would fly out to meet my parents a couple times a year, and I would go to the flea markets there, and I would ship myself back boxes and boxes and boxes of games, and they were in the junk piles at the flea markets out in the Bay Area of California, and cost nothing. I mean, I was buying prototype Atari games, I was buying sealed games, I was buying everything and anything you could imagine, video game wise, and like I said, it was costing me little to nothing, and times were great. And I'll say this, because not that many people were hunting for it, it was probably, I don't want to say harder to find, but you didn't really know what was out there. There was just a small handful of people, and John and Joe and I kind of connected through a little fanzine that Joe ran, actually called Digital Press Fanzine, and that was really the whole world. There's those guys that you were able to connect with over the phone or through the mail, and you would go out and I would pick up stuff. But the stuff that you would find is amazing by today's standards. People would be losing their I won't say the word, but they would be flipping out over some of the stuff that we were scooping up back in the day. I'll give you a super quick story. John and I went down to a little town on the border of Texas and Mexico in what was it, John? 98 or 99? I don't know.
I think it was 99. Yeah.
99.
Yeah.
And we had found a warehouse, and they still had a bunch of the old stuff. And John and I ended up buying, I don't know, 50, 60,000 pieces of Atari era games. And, we had to hire a semi to actually take them back to Chicago, where we were going to distribute them amongst ourselves. But at that time, the guy who was selling them also had several thousand pieces of sealed Nintendo games. And here John and I were thinking, we had the foresight, we're going in there, we're going to buy all these Atari games, and we're getting them for pennies a piece, and we'll sell them for $5 a piece and make a killing. When it turned out the Nintendo guy, we said, who's going to want those Nintendo games? And we left them all behind. We never took a single one.
Oh no!
Thousands of them the guy had. Brand new, sealed in the box. They would be worth a bloody fortune today.
Oh my gosh!
Let me just add to that the stuff this guy had for the Atari and like in television was some of the rarer games of the time. Things like Sword Quest Waterworld and in television Super Cobra and all the games that you wouldn't normally see. So we can only imagine what he had for Nintendo. But the even worse part of it is to show how we were all, not just Sean and me and Joe, we were really all kind of focused. We called Sean called a friend of his in California and said, hey, should we get these? Do you think anybody wants this Nintendo stuff? And the guy said, nah, leave that. Nobody wants that crap. and so we did.
Wow.
That wasn't so short-sighted. If you put yourself back at that time,
Yeah.
and it's the same today, right? Like, who today is like, I better collect all the PlayStation 4 games I can because PlayStation 5 is out now. No, people don't really think that way.
More people think that way than they did back then. But in our defense with the Nintendo stuff, the Atari era stuff, we were paying, I don't know what it was, less than $1, 50 cents a game. But the guy wanted a whole, I don't know what it was. It was like
$2.
It was like, yeah, $2-3 a game for the Nintendo stuff. We're like, are you crazy? We're not gonna pay that. So. Oh my gosh.
Well, it's interesting. With 7,000 NES, you could have started a whole store. Like, you could have started multiple.
It would have been unbelievable.
But it's interesting at the time, though, Atari was really the focus, and clearly
for us it was,
for at least
sure,
you guys, yeah.
Yeah.
And if it was, you said what year was that around? You said around 89, 90? What was it?
No, not 98.
98. Oh wow,
98,
wow,
yeah.
so super late. Okay, that's amazing. You still have them all, clean and boxed and complete and sit. That's incredible. What other cool hauls have you guys pulled in your exploits?
Well, another interesting story is there was a company called Comavid here in Illinois. They were based in Aurora, Illinois, and it was founded by 3 doctors who worked at Fermilab, this super hardcore research and development facility for bioengineering and things like that. And these guys saw, at the time, they were like, wow, this Atari is making a ton of money. I think we could probably figure it out. So these 3 guys made this little side business for themselves. They reverse engineered the Atari because there were no dev kits at the time. If you wanted to make games, you had to figure it out by yourself. So they reversed engineered the Atari, and they put out their own line of games. I think they ended up with 9 or 10 titles that they released, and they did average. They were crushed by the crash in '84, just like everybody else. But the interesting thing about Comavid is they had 2 games that were, even today, are among the rarest Atari games that exist. One is called Magic Card, which was a tool that you would use to program video games with, but you had to program in hexadecimal, which is, programming in assembly language is painful enough. A hexadecimal, I would rather have pins stuck under my fingernails. It's so tedious and time consuming and really, really annoying. But anyway, they made this cartridge called Magic Card and used the Atari little keypad controllers, and you could type in hexadecimal and write your own game. Supposedly, they only sold, we're not exactly sure how many they sold, but anywhere between 10 and 50, somewhere around there. But I don't honestly know how many they sold. Not very many, but what's that?
Neither did they.
Yeah.
No, right. Neither did they. Exactly. Yeah. People have tried to document over the years, like make up lists of people who own them and whatnot. But anyway, so Magic Card was one of the other one that they made was a game called Video Life, which wasn't a game at all. It was really just a graphic demo that built these little fractal displays on the Atari 2600 screen. And Video Life is arguably the top 2 or 3 rarest Atari 2600 games that there are that saw any sort of level of distribution. There's a couple of people that made games in their garage that I don't really consider, but anyway, a few years back, we decided to hunt those guys down. Since I live here in Illinois, John and Joe would come and visit somewhat often, and we decided to track those guys down, and we went and found them, and not only did we find them, we bought the company from them. So we 25 years after the company went out of business, since those guys never really disappeared, we bought the company, and we actually got a couple of copies of that Video Life game out of the deal. So, and a couple of Magic Cards in addition to some of their other titles. So that was one of the more interesting stories.
That's really cool. That's amazing. That's cool that you could still have those connections too, right? Even 25 years later, run into those people and have that kind of connection. Joe, you mentioned Digital Press, which was now a store, which was a fanzine. How was that putting that together back in the day? How did that influence a lot of the collecting that you were doing?
I think it did influence the collecting quite a bit. Like Sean said, the 3 of us met through that fanzine. Again, my friend Kevin with the Pong system and I, and no internet, were wondering if there were people out there like us that were collecting things that were, generations old, as far as game system go. So we decided to put together this little newsletter that was dedicated to, what are the older games that people are looking for? Which of them are fun to play that you may not have known about? Can we communicate with others like us out there through some sort of buy, sell, trade list kind of a thing? And it kind of took off. And we weren't the first fanzine in the video game world, but we may have been the first to like reach out to pro game magazines. So we got a lot of publicity since we were, like this sort of niche culture. And, so John and Sean came aboard, and we ended up grabbing another, I don't know, maybe 50 or so experts, right? Like people that really knew either their local area or a particular system. So like back in those days, like John was writing the lists and the price values for everything that was Atari, because he had spent, his life pretty much gathering that information for himself. So we became this collective that could share all of that info. And, it was a newsletter from 91 until probably, I don't know when we stopped doing it. Technically, it's still active, but we stopped doing the paper after, the internet started to really be a much better way to do that. We did Price Guy, for a while we were doing price lists in the fanzine, but then we started to do books that were price guides, and that got out there. So people for a while there had like a Beckett's type list that would tell them what the games were available for the systems that they collected and how valuable those could be. They're so outdated now. Even if you look back at the last book we did, it's hilarious to look at.
I'm sure.
What? There's no way this was ever $1,000. So, but like we said, it's these things are constantly evolving, and in the time, I think we were probably the best at doing that kind of thing.
That's really exciting to be kind of at the forefront of that, and also again creating those connections with people from. It sounds like around the country, and creating that network around the world. Okay. Yeah. Kind of creating that network, is without the internet, without things like that to make things easier, even like, BBSs and things of that nature. Yeah, that's really incredible that was able to grow to that level. And you had the support of kind of like your EGMs of the world. And as you kind of move forward.
Yeah, we did. I think the biggest champion of our cause was Chris Bieniak. He did a couple of Video Game Pro magazines in the time. Video Games and Computer Entertainment, I think, was the big one, where he would put in, this fanzine is really good. Bill Kunkel, who's known as the Video Game Doctor, he wrote for Electronic Games Magazine for years, would do fanzine reviews for various pro zines, and we were always there. We're always listed. So I think we were constantly in people's face as, if you're looking for old stuff, these are the people to go look for.
That's cool. And it's interesting now that you've kind of gone from, and you still collect to a certain extent, but right now you're kind of moving into more like archiving with the museum. And again, I do want to touch on that, but you brought up something very interesting, or Sean did at least, when it comes to the crash in '83. Obviously everyone knows, if you're listening to this podcast, you know what happened. In your mind, do you think that could have been avoided, or was that inevitable based on what the industry was doing?
It's an interesting thing, and you can argue multiple reasons. When we have people and I'm doing tours at the museum, everybody, hey, what about ET? Well, ET is not the reason the industry crashed. I'll never defend ET. I don't really like it, so I have a hard time doing that. But I think the bigger issue was it was the Wild West, and I don't know the first thing about programming. But maybe I got somebody who had some knowledge, and we cobbled together a game. You look at the Atari 2600, 5 million consoles or whatever the number was at the time out there. And I only have to sell a fraction. If I sold 10,000 copies, man, I'm making some serious money, right? So everybody's jumping on this bandwagon. And it really led to this glut of bad software that was coming out. And you see it, a company like Mythicon or something, which put out 3 games, but oh my God, they're literally the worst, you could imagine. But people, stuff started ending up in clearance bins, of course. And as a parent now, you come in and you say, okay, look, games were $30, $40. We were, as a kid, man, you were pitching it. No, Easter, could I get a game? It wasn't anything, and so as a parent, they come in, they're buying a game, but then they see this clearance bin where maybe they can get 4 or 5 games for that same $30, $40, right, at the time. And they're buying them, and they're bad games. They're terrible, right?
Right.
There's a reason they're in the clearance bin.
Right.
And that just kind of exacerbated the problem, because what happened then was, okay, well, these are kind of the no-name people, but suddenly you have the big names like Atari, who is supposed to be responsible for putting out all this great product, and you have a game like ET that's rushed to market in 5-6 weeks instead of 6 to 8 months, right? Or a game like Pac-Man for the 2600, right, with a Flicker Man. I mean, again, pushed out to make either a movie tie-in, the Christmas buying season, whatever the case was. So when the big names that you trusted started, disappointing and putting out that type of product, that's really what led to the downfall and everybody getting kind of disillusioned with it and saying, well, this is just a passing fad, and, it's going away soon. We're on to the next thing,
Right.
And you did have keep in mind, you did have a shift to computers at the time too.
Sure.
Because the price of memory was coming down considerably. So computers that were once $1,000 are now $300, $400, $500.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? We don't talk about it because it was illegal, but that same $30, $40 would buy you a box of 10 floppies that you take to your friend's house, and he would put games on both sides, and you'd have 100 games for that same price as one cartridge. So
interesting.
Yeah, big shift there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Consumer confidence is always a thing, right? And the reason I brought that up is because Sean mentioned a really interesting point about how you could just code a game yourself. If you can code in base 16, which I think that's what Hex is, you could absolutely make your own game and put it in the marketplace. So to your mind, then, when Nintendo came around in 85, 86 and put these strict regulations in there, hey, we must approve it, they must have this, they must have that, do you feel like that was necessary at the time to restore that consumer confidence?
Well, don't let Nintendo fool you. Nintendo was doing that for money.
Oh, well, listen.
Nintendo wanted everybody to publish their games through Nintendo, so they had to pay Nintendo to publish them. But what you're saying, I believe, is completely accurate. Whether it was symbolic or real, that little Nintendo seal of quality, because I can find that Nintendo seal of quality on some pretty crappy games.
Oh yeah,
for sure. So it doesn't mean that but at the time it was symbolic, and people looked at it and they said, oh well, Nintendo has looked at this game and Nintendo says it must be okay. So maybe we should jump back into the video game market. And there were some really good games with that seal of quality on it. So yes, but were there some bad ones too? There were some really bad ones. I think that there's more than one thing that caused that the crash in 83, 84, and one of them was the glut of bad software. But I think the other one had something to do with the fact that most of the people that were playing games were the same age at that time. Right now, if you look at it, you got people playing games that are 4 years old and people that are playing games that are 80 years old. And even if all of the 10-year-olds got sick of video games and they were tired of all the crappy games, you would still have millions and millions of other people that were still playing games. I think that everybody kind of grew up at the same time, had something to do with it as well. And back when Nintendo came back in 85, the people that were still playing games were excited to have something new to play. Because like I said, I put my games down for a couple of years to find a girl, but not because I was tired of the games. I mean, I was still happy with my Intellivision, and I was still happy with the software. Not having an Atari, there wasn't really that glut of bad Intellivision software. I'm not saying that there wasn't any bad Intellivision software. Of course there was, but I was still pretty happy with the games that I had. But when Nintendo came out, people that were still playing games were like, hey, who's this Mario guy? And wow, this game's really fun. And who's Zelda, and what there was a lot of really fun stuff that showed up in 85, and that seal of quality just happened to be on it. So I think that it was needed at the time. But like I said, I think Nintendo's motives behind it were probably 80% financial and 20% symbolic. So
the media back then was so limited that even if you were a parent choosing for the best looking game, you didn't really have anything to back it up. I mean, maybe you had a magazine that maybe had a review, but by the time Nintendo came along, there were many magazines doing video game reviews and lots of access to that stuff. And when people talk today about shouldn't there be another crash, should we expect it? Because there's way, way, way too many games being created, and a lot of them are really, really bad. But you now have not only the reviews of everybody on the internet that has a thing, but you have all these peer reviews. How many stars is it given on all of these different sites? You know, you're stupid now if you're a parent and you choose a game that you want to return the day you get it, because you haven't done the research. You didn't have that option back then.
Oh, absolutely.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of leads me into another question, because we kind of hinted on it as we were talking about the collecting world, how back in the olden days, you could have gotten 7,000 NES games for $2 a pop. Nowadays, it's nowadays, right? It's got pretty crazy. How do you guys feel about the current state of retro collecting and acquiring, and the fact that games have almost become a commodity as opposed to something that people are collecting for nostalgic reasons? People are now almost investing in. How do you all feel about that?
Hate it with a passion.
Yeah,
absolutely hate it. You take a look at the introduction of this grading stuff, and a lot of it is a scam in our opinion, where we think that, these people are just buying and selling amongst themselves to artificially inflate the values of these games. But to some extent, some of it has to be true in order to even get to that level. I mean, does that mean that the Mario 64 game was worth $1 million? No, but does that mean that it probably could have legitimately sold to more than one person for $50,000? Probably, right?
Sure.
So, and that's the problem. So now all of a sudden, the average guy like us back in the early to mid 80s, and we just wanted to get started collecting, that guy can't do it anymore. It's virtually impossible. Or you have to be independently wealthy, and it's not cool. Not only that, I mean, we've already got all that stuff. So so do what you want. Inflate the prices all you want. As far as we're concerned, we have it all anyway. But like I said, it squeezes out the people that make the whole thing interesting. It's really really not good in my opinion anyway. And I'm sure my partners will echo the same sentiment.
Yeah, I of course would agree with Sean, and I'm sure Joe feels the same way a little bit. Part of the issue is that, like he said, you could never build a collection of the magnitude today that we were able to do, because you just couldn't afford it, right? Everything is just so expensive that and as a museum, we look at it as another piece that also is damaged. Is when we're out trying to connect with programmers or people who are in the industry and archive their history, right? So it just makes it that much tougher, because now everybody thinks, all they see is the bits and pieces, right? And they say, $1 million video game. So now every video game to the general masses is $1 million in their eyes, right? So if you look, you only have to look at, social media, Facebook, all these, where you see people constantly, I got this, how much is this worth? Everybody's looking to make a zillion dollars on it. But also, how do you, as an institution like us, where I might have a guy who's in the industry and he's got quite a detailed history and he wants to have that preserved. But now I have this lure of money, whereas in the past he might have donated his items to us, but now he's got a friend that's saying, dude, are you crazy? You could sell that stuff and make, $100,000 with all the maniacs out there. And that stuff, and I'm not trying to be sour grapes about it, but it prevents the preservation. Yeah. So it'll end up selling to the highest bidder and end up in their garage or in their closet, and it'll sit there till the day they die, And
then what happens to it at that point?
Then the family throw it out, right?
Right.
I mean, we had that perfect example, John, when we met with the Atari artist, and we were talking to them, and some of them had some of the original paintings that they had painted for the boxes from the Atari games, and we were talking to a couple of them, and one guy in particular, I won't mention his name, but one guy in particular had some really, really cool stuff, and we were talking to him about potentially acquiring it for the museum, and the conversation didn't get too long until he started and throwing out like $50,000 numbers, and at that point we're out. I mean, we can't afford to spend. I mean, how many different things can we spend or can we acquire for $50,000 versus one painting of one Atari box? And but like John said, so now what happens to that? The guy with the deepest pockets ends up buying that piece of Atari art, and it sits in his house or in his basement, and it's never. I mean, is he going to do something or is he going to take care of it? Probably, but what the hell's going to happen to it when he's done with it? And his kids don't know. I mean, we see that all the time. My kids threw it out, or my wife threw it out. I mean, how many former industry people did we talk to whose wives threw their stuff out? I mean, because they didn't know anything about it. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Not good.
And you talk a lot about preservation, which is obviously a big part of it, right? When something becomes a commodity, its value is based on a market, right? As opposed to aesthetic value or nostalgic value or really even caring about it. So like to your point, Sean, if the price on these things drop eventually, like any commodity, any market rises and falls, this guy realizes, oh wow, this thing I spent $10,000 on is now worth $4, maybe $3. What's he going to do with it? Right. Is he going to sell it on the cheap to the first person who has it? And then so it's really a shame. And I agree. And also, as far as the collecting market goes, it is a little suspect when the rating company also runs the auctions.
Oh yeah,
that's not. That's
it's not a lot suspect. That's a lot suspect.
It's rather suspect. And I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. It's an interesting world, and I really feel for you guys because again, a lot of people who listen to this show collect retro games. It's kind of who do it on the side and do it. Twitch streamers and a lot of people and YouTubers and such who do try to amass these amazing collections. So I do, and I speak to people like you. I really want to get your take on it because it's going to speak to the audience listening. Kind of band together around that because it is really hard. I can't imagine, especially for people who own stores, right? Like Sean, you have a store in Chicago and you're selling retro games. It must be very hard for you to keep stock, if nothing else.
It's much more difficult. I've owned this stuff for 19 years now, and it's much more difficult than it used to be. I'll say that because everybody comes in and like John was saying, well, they say, oh, I saw the Super Mario 64 sold for $1 million. How much are you going to pay me for mine? Probably $10. Oh my God, what's the matter with you? You're a robber. You're a thief. I'm calling the police. No, it's not worth $1 million. I'm sorry. It happens all the time. And not on that large a scale, but like I just had a guy in here yesterday who brought a PlayStation 2 in to sell me, and it didn't even work. It was broken, and he said, "Oh, these sell for $200 online." I said, "No, man, they really don't, especially not when they're broken." I mean, everybody sees these crazy numbers of insert any random item into this conversation, and you have to fight with them over that in a store. But honestly, it's even more important to me at the museum. Like. We're trying to put together something that's going to last through the ages, so to speak. I mean, John and Joe and I are not going to be around forever. Obviously, we're gonna try, but something tells me we'll probably fail. But we're not going to be around forever. So what we want to do is we want to leave something behind that people are going to be able to learn from, and it makes it so much more difficult when everything is scattered all over the country in thousands of different collections. And that's not to suggest that we don't think other people should be allowed to collect. Of course they should. But when they're competing with thousands of other people and just splintering the archive into so many different pieces, there isn't going to be that central kind of gathering or central collection that other people are going to appreciate years to come when all of us are gone. And that's the part that's super frustrating for me.
Yeah, and then just to reiterate, like we said, so I mean, how many people collect today, right? There's just an incredible amount. And how many have looked ahead at what's going to happen when they're gone, right? And, so it's one thing, okay, somebody has something really cool, really rare, really historically important. But, what happens? Something happens, God forbid, and now the family doesn't know what to do with it. Maybe it goes in the garbage.
Yeah. And
how much of that, is going to be lost now because of time? So at the very least, I would encourage listeners or everybody to really, it's not a topic anyone likes to address, but you know, you kind of need to look ahead at, you know, the future. And, you know, not only that, do you want to burden your family with the hassle of trying to figure out what this stuff is worth, and making sure it goes to a good place or whatever? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. We know people that it's happened to, and you know, it's a real struggle for the families to try and deal with. So, you know, make some plans ahead of time, and you know, hopefully you'll look at, you know, getting a museum involved. Museums aren't always donations.
Sure.
You know, they spend money as well. But you know, I do want to make one other note, like we were just talking about with Sean and Joe, and you know, of course I'm biased, they're my partners and friends, but I'll say this, you know, completely disassociated from them. Both of them run genuine stores that are not out gouging people. Okay, they're reasonably priced items in there. I can honestly say that as someone who's been to both of their stores. You know, we're all friends. There's a lot of stores out now that are just, you know, it's just ridiculous. You walk in, you see something. It's just, these guys are trying to make it reasonable for someone who maybe is collecting and trying to get into the hobby. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess is the word, because they're reasonably priced. They also have to deal with the flippers who come into their store and come into their booths at cons because, you know, so who's stupid? You know, them for charging a reasonable price, and now a guy comes along, buys up everything, and then he's flipping it on eBay. I know both of them probably have not sold items to people because they knew those people were going to flip it. But again, it's a business. You gotta, you know, you gotta find that happy medium. So,
Yeah.
I can give you a recent example. We have, I mean, in the history of the PlayStation 5, I've probably had 6 of them traded in. And the reason why only 6 of them have been traded in, other than that they're hard to get and people probably want to keep it, is that I'm only going to pay you the value that I would pay based on what I'm going to sell it for. And I don't sell it for more than retail value. So all the people on eBay that are selling them for $900, $1,000 a piece are the flippers that are going to get my $400 console from me. So when we get one traded in, it pretty much gets hidden until customers that we know aren't those customers are in the store, and then we mention it to them. When somebody says you got a PlayStation 5, for you, I do.
That's cool. That's good business too, even outside of that. But I think that's awesome. That's really fantastic. I love hearing that because, you know, obviously, and we can get the whole conversation about scalpers and bots and all and that whole craziness that's going on. But I think that's really, for lack of a better term, noble, that you would reserve that stuff for people, you know, who aren't going to turn around the secondary market and try to make a quick buck off of it, which of course is exactly what's happening still. You know, what, a year, over a year now after its release. I mean, it's pretty crazy. But I do want to touch on, and actually now let's move into the museum itself, because obviously archiving is what you guys are all about, and it's kind of what you've always been doing. So in that vein, let's talk about the museum. How many pieces are in the museum right now? Because I remember from your conversation about 5 years ago, you were only displaying maybe a quarter of what you had. Is that still the case, or is
less than a quarter now?
Yeah.
So we get new stuff all the time. So
how many pieces do you have in the actual museum itself, and then how many do you from a pool of how much do you figure? I mean, obviously, you know.
I don't think we can answer that. Lots, and not quite that many on display. But I don't think any of us know the number. There's and in addition to the museum's about 10,000 square feet. And then we have an additional 5,000 square feet of storage off-site.
Okay.
And then you know, I know I have a lot of storage here, although most of my stuff is down in Texas now, because if something happened to me, my wife is definitely throwing it in the garbage. So I got it all down to Texas quick as possible. But I don't think any of us really know. I mean, we have a a database for insurance purposes, but
Sure.
even that, I mean, there's only so much we can catalog.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's on display in the museum, we kind of try and swap it out from time to time and make sure that there's different things for people to see that come regularly as best as we can. But we're right now the museum is like 2 pounds of bologna in a 1 pound package. We're really jammed in there, so it's pretty rough. But we do the best we can with the space that we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even if you took just one little aspect of it, the games themselves, right? We have complete libraries of just about everything. I mean, I had a guy sell me his complete Wii U collection, and what am I supposed to do? We can't display a complete Wii U collection at the museum, and we have that for 30 years worth of software. So we have on display probably 1% of that.
Yeah, right.
That's
exactly.
Think about every little thing that we have on display. We have a wall of T-shirts. Guys, think about
yeah,
25, 20, right? 30 T-shirts. We must have 1,000 T-shirts.
I think we could clothe a small country in our T-shirts. Actually,
So you name it, a magazine, right? A toy, like a toy that's related to video games. Like we have probably 1% on display of what we've got in the collection. So to count up the number of pieces, I don't even know how we would do it.
That's fair. And that's actually really fair. 1% is amazing. So how do you guys, obviously there are some things that probably stay on all the time. And then it sounds like you rotate out, as you get new stuff in, maybe there's some more interesting things. How do you guys come to that decision on what to put out on the floor and what to keep in the storage?
Well, I'll jump in a little bit with, a lot of it is, so there's a little bit of a trick to it too. Okay. There's so much on display that people generally don't realize if they come back 2 months later that we haven't changed anything. Because what we find is that people will technically, as they're going through, they see it's overwhelming and they kind of gloss over a lot of stuff. We all the time get people who come back through and they're like, "Oh, this wasn't here last time." I'm like, yeah, it's been there for 8 months. And just so much that the second time through, or even a third time, they're seeing things they didn't see before just because they were too overwhelmed. So,
Sure.
I'll say this, when we first opened, we thought, we got to change it up every month and do this and do that. And we quickly realized that we don't. But, to that point, though, we do have a lot of themed things. So, there's different stages that we talk about through the museum that kind of relate to the history or aspects of the industry. And then there's other items, that are just what we call flex exhibits, or they're just a little of this, a little of that, just crazy stuff we want you to see. Here's a bunch of video game cereal from the 80s. And here's a bunch of Mario memorabilia that has old Marios with googly eyes and weird faces and, some of the bizarre stuff they've come out with. So that stuff, we try to curate and keep those collections and cycling through, fairly regularly.
Gotcha. One of my favorite aspects of it, and again, forgive me if things have changed layouts. Again, it's been a while since I've been by. One of my favorite aspects is you had one wall of just systems with games that were ready to play. Yes. And one of my favorite aspects of the museum is it's very interactive. You want people to touch it. You want people to play it. You want people to go to the 80s themed bedroom, right, and see Duck Hunt and an old CRT. And I'm assuming that's still a thing. And why is that so important for you as people who are archiving? And are you concerned about the risk of things getting broken or messed up? Sounds like probably no, considering how much stuff you have.
It never happened.
I would say, yeah, some kids spilling soda on an old Genesis or something, but it's obviously a big part of what the video game museum is all about. Can you speak to just kind of why you went that route?
The nature of the subject. I mean, video games are meant to be played, so that's I think that was the important thing. And we all kind of felt that way, but Joe was probably the biggest champion of that aspect of things. We didn't want to build an old, stuffy, boring museum because of the subject or the subject that the museum is about. It's it's not it's not. I mean, we have stuff that you have to be kept behind glass and stuff that we can't allow people to touch. But if at all
Sure.
possible, we want people to be able to touch it and play it and experience it. And like I said, I think that. I think people, people generally appreciate it, but things do get broken, and and not that we like it, but we manage the best that we can. So there's very little. In fact, we don't put anything out for play that can't be replaced, 10 times over.
Sure,
So.
sure, yeah, yeah.
I mean, we've had very little issue. We're almost coming up on 6 years now, and
Right.
I think I can name on one hand, items that were stolen, just recently, a couple months back, someone stole the Tetris cartridge out of our Game Boy that we have out for play. Probably the most common game out there. Like, I have no idea why they would take that, but all right, whatever. We got another one. The public in general is pretty rough on stuff. And often, it's all too often people think this is a playground just because we have that play aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So, they tend to come in, let the kids run wild, and it's a bit of a challenge, but, certain equipment holds up. I'll say this, that wall you mentioned with the game systems, those systems have been there since day one. And pretty much, however many, we're open 6 days a week, 7 during the summer. So
Sure.
those systems are still running pretty much straight for 6 years. I mean, I wish I could say the same about the arcade machines.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine the arcade machine.
Those go bad just looking at them wrong.
Oof,
but
man,
yeah, I'll say this: probably the worst system we have out that we've had the most issues with is the Dreamcast.
Oh, wow.
Gone through probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 Dreamcasts. The lasers will just burn out after a while. Just can't do it. So,
That's a shame.
But
That's a shame. If you have someone who's new to the museum, what would be the one thing you'd want them to spend some time on? Because when I went to the museum, I probably spent about 2 hours and change. Me, kid in the candy shop, right? Just had a blast ingesting everything. But a new guest comes in, someone who's never experienced it before. What's the one either item or exhibit that you would hope they really spend a little time in ingesting? I
mean, they're all there. They all of the exhibits that are there had to make a drastic cut list, basically. Like we had 100 ideas, and we kept scaling it down and scaling it down and scaling it down until we ended up with 20 or so that we felt you absolutely had to have it. We wouldn't have a museum if we couldn't get all of these things squeezed in. So I'm sure each one of us could pick any one of those exhibits and use that as a reason for why people should go and the thing that they need to see. I'll throw mine out there. Cool. So we've been talking about Crash of '83. We have this really cool exhibit that is a reproduction of a store that has crashed in 1983. It's supposed to look like what it looked like back then. It has the same feel, and at the same time, it explains a lot of the things that we've talked about here today between, the crappy software that came out, the lack of media, the rise of computers, big companies like Atari making a mistake like ET. And I think if you spend a little bit of time there, you get a little better perspective about the industry's darkest days, which I think in the very short history of video games is probably the most important time for people to remember.
For sure. What about you, John?
Myself, I think people should really pay attention at the very beginning at the Pong exhibit, mainly because it generates, from the roots. So you really need to learn about the brown box and, how that became the Odyssey and, started the whole thing, and, Atari jumping in with their Pong, and, there's a whole history right there. And that what we call stage one to begin, is really the real basic roots of it. And I think it's pretty interesting.
Remind me on what stage one is. Is it a big Pong machine? I'm trying to remember from when I was there.
So along with the artifacts, there is a giant Pong there,
right? Yeah,
that you can also play as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, having just kind of getting that roots of where it began, right? I think that actually is very important. Sean, what about you?
I don't really have a specific thing that I would tell people to check out. I mean, I think the main thing I would ask people to do is to plan on spending a little bit of time.
Yeah.
If you go there and you've only got a half an hour, or you just want to breeze through there, you're going to miss so much. So
Yeah.
I think the main thing I would ask is, plan on spending at least an hour and a half there, and just kind of, I mean, it's funny because when we do these tours at the museum on Sundays, and I've done a few of them with family members and things like that. But you get so much more out of the museum if you actually stop and read some of the placards that are there.
Yeah.
We spent a whole bunch of time writing, but and you can see that firsthand as you're actually spouting out that information to people. They're, oh, really? Well, dude, if you would have read the little placard, you would already know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can see how much more people get out of it. And then pretty much anything that we tell as we're walking people around the museum, whether it's a Sunday tour or a meeting or whatever it is, pretty much anything that we say is written there somewhere if you spend the time to look for it. So I think that would be my biggest suggestion, is to plan on spending a little bit of time. It's fun. You'll enjoy it if you put a little bit of time into it.
Yeah, and again, I can tell you from experience, it's been too long since I've visited. It is an absolute blast. If you listen to this show, and if you're listening to this, clearly you do, it's totally up your alley, for sure. So again, you have innumerable amounts of items in this collection, right? I'm not going to say valuable because that kind of falls against what you guys are about, of course. But would you say one of the most important or unique? Let's do it that way. What are one of the most unique items you have in the collection right now out on the floor?
I was going to say, and I was going to tell a story about the RDI Halcyon. The RDI Halcyon is pretty significant, and it's a laser disc based video game system, and I think there's fewer than 10 of them or 12 of them out there, something like that. It was only around for a little while, obviously, and they didn't sell hardly any because it was super expensive at the time. But the funny story about it is that when we went to meet the person who we got ours from, he was a salesman for the company, and he wanted a lot of money for that RDI Halcyon, and the museum was just starting, so money was a little tight. So John and Joe pretty much had to tell me to shut the hell up, and bought it against my objections, mainly because I didn't really even know what the hell it was. And here I am, one of three guys opening a museum, and I didn't even really know what this thing was. They both did, but I didn't. And it turns out it's super historically significant. We built a special display case for it, and we have it out with all of the games that are in it. And just because it's kind of a lesson in humility for me, and not knowing what the hell I'm talking about, I kind of appreciate that maybe more than most people. But it's a super cool system, and it's super historically significant, and it's super rare and even valuable. We can throw that out there. So
Sure.
Halcyon's definitely one. The Sega Neptune that we have, that's a big one that people really enjoy seeing. And we have a lot of things like that. That we could say are one of a kind or two of a kind or things like that. I mentioned earlier I'm an Atari guy, so one of the things that really gets me crazy is we actually have a prototype Atari Space Race that was the one that was in Atari's lobby at their headquarters, and it's the only one of that style. So Atari made the Space Race was a pretty bland looking machine for the most part, but they made 50 fiberglass units, and almost all of them, actually I think 49 of them, are like almost like a green, yellowish green, whereas the one that we have that was in the lobby is the only one that's emerald green. And
wow,
it's really this deep green. A very cool looking piece. And as far as we know, it's the only one out there with that style and that color. So, there's a lot of little things like that throughout. And I'm sure Joe probably has something that, we all identify with something else,
It's so hard to pick one. It's one of
exactly.
Again, so many things are not making the cut. There's just the thing sitting in storage that would be worth displaying. So what's out there is pretty much the cream of the crop. I don't know, we have a lot of things that you would call one of a kind. Some of them might not be as interesting to people as they are to me, but One of our teammates is on our board of directors is Randy Pitchford. You know his name, Gearbox guy, who introduced us to Texas and specifically to the city of Frisco. Randy donated to us one of the Half-Life, the PC game Half-Life prototypes that was designed to go on the Sega Dreamcast, as we were talking about.
Wow.
And it never got released. It got leaked at some point. It was available, on the internet to download, and I think just about anybody can get their hands on it and play it on a Dreamcast that can handle a pirated or bootleg disc. But we have the original on display, the original Half-Life for the Dreamcast, which is, if you're a Dreamcast guy or collector, it's a pretty big deal.
That's really awesome, guys. One other very quick thing. I was doing a podcast on my brother and I. A side show for this podcast is called Tales from the Bargain Bin, and where my brother and I talk about the games we got from well-meaning family members who didn't get Nintendo Power and just got something, to what we were talking about. Oh, why spend $50 on a Nintendo game? I'll spend $5 on this game. And that it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Sometimes those bargain bin games are great. They're little gems, right? And one of them was Marble Madness. I'm sure you all know Marble Madness. And it was evidently released on a thing called the Milton Bradley Omni. What is that thing? A, do you have one? And B, oh no, he is Sean is going to the racks. Just for listeners, Sean is sitting in the back room, I guess, of his store. We're just, oh my gosh, he has just pulled out an Omni entertainment system. Wow. So clearly the answer is yes. Wow. I was trying to think the most random system I know of, and that was basically it. Well done, Sean. Well done.
Yeah, I actually literally had one 10 feet from you, so I couldn't help myself.
That's so great. Well, guys, I really appreciate all the work you guys put into this archiving, the collecting, to keeping these things not only pristine, but available for future generations, right? Because that is really what the National Video Game Museum is all about. So thank you for fighting the good fight. And guys, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. This was a blast. I'm super glad we were able to connect and talk. Just a quick postscript on the Omni thing. We were on a 4-way Zoom call, and Sean literally got up, walked to his right, and snagged one off a shelf. I mean, it literally blew me away. I wish you could have seen it. It was remarkable. This random thing I thought up, there it was. Pretty amazing stuff. Thanks again to Joe, John, and Sean for taking the time to chat with me for this episode. If you want to check out the National Video Game Museum, and you really should, next time you're in Dallas, it's about 30 minutes away. You really should go check it out. Give yourself a couple hours. It's a really good time. Visit nvmusa.org for hours and ticket information. And as always, thank you so much for checking out A Gamer Looks at 40. If you haven't already, follow me on Twitter at A Gamer Looks at 40. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. I'm really trying to get into the habit of posting there more often, but I'm always posting on Twitter. That's the main place to connect with me socially on the social medias. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/agamerlooksa4040. Check out the tiers. If you're interested, sign up. I'd greatly appreciate it. And until next time, play retro.